In today's episode of Today in World War II, the Soviets attack over the frozen ice in Lake Ladoga to try to outflank the Finns. Hitler moves up his timetable to invade Norway. The Luftwaffe almost completely destroys the city center of Swansea, Wales. Meanwhile, speaking of destruction, the Japanese attack Darwin, Australia. And the Japanese, a year later, have to evacuate all their planes from Rabaul due to Allied pressure. And finally, in one of the bloodiest battles of the war, the U.S. Marines land on Iwo Jima. Let's get started. Okay, so on February 19th, 1940, the Soviet 18th Division decided to try to outflank the Finnish defenders in the Karelian Isthmus in the Taipale sector. They tried to attack across the frozen Lake Savanto, and the Finns still had enough artillery capability to create a lot of damage, which they did. They were able to halt the attack after inflicting nearly 1,000 casualties. So even though the Mannerheim line was in shambles, the second defense line was crumbling, they still packed a punch and were still able to make every inch of Finnish territory that the Soviets were able to take, they paid for it in lots of Soviet blood. And that was important because they still needed to show a position of strength to be able to get a armistice that would work in their favor and not the Soviets. But what will work in your favor and my favor, as you may have heard if you watch more of my videos, is if you subscribe to my channel. It's really easy. All you gotta do is just click on the subscribe button. There's a bell there you click on that will notify you whenever I drop a new video. It's very simple, it's easy to do, and you're doing me a solid to help me grow my channel, so I would greatly appreciate it. On November 19th, 1940, Hitler was very alarmed by the Altmark incident that happened a few days ago, and I talked about this in that video where a British destroyer uh, violated Norwegian neutrality, went into their waters, captured the Altmark, which, by the way, was the supply ship for the German pocket battleship, the Graf Spee, in the South Atlantic. As the war started, and they freed 299 British sailors from being POWs. Well, Hitler was so alarmed by how easy and willing the Royal Navy was to violate Norwegian neutral waters, which, oh, by the way, was how he was getting all his iron ore from Sweden shipped through Norwegian territorial waters, neutral waters for that matter. He decided that he was going to speed up the implementation and the planning of his invasion of Norway, which would take place just a number of weeks later. So that was an unintended consequence to Churchill's bold stroke to rescue those British sailors. It's a very bold stroke if you take the time right now to like this video and leave a comment. It's a thumbs up and a thumbs down thing. Just click the thumbs up. That's all you got to do. And then that way you will help me with the algorithm. The algorithm loves engagement. That will help my video be shown to more and more people. Thanks. On February 19th, 1942, the Japanese attacked Darwin, Australia. If you know anything about Australian geography, Darwin is the farthest north city in Australia. Kind of a out of the way place. It's not exactly a major metropolis. It was certainly wasn't then, but it's more developed now, of course. But because the Japanese had now, well, we're in the process of conquering the Dutch East Indies or Indonesia, as we call it now. They had land-based aircraft. They had carriers that were in the waters, and so they decided they were going to, give the Australians incoming attractions of what was or coming attractions of what was going to happen to them later. They hoped. Luckily, it didn't happen, but this was the first city that got full scale Japanese bombing in World War II. The ace, the famous fighter pilot Mutsuo Fuchida, who led the Pearl Harbor attack, he led the first two waves of the attacks on Darwin. There was a lot of damage done, but it was never bombed into the Stone Age. It was able to recover. It wasn't the first time that Darwin would be attacked. It was the first. I mean, they would have there would be attacks after this, but this was the first one. And on November 19th, 1944, this was a culminating move for the Allied forces. They had been moving up since Guadalcanal, up to Solomon Islands, up to the slot, as the Marines called it. And as they got closer and closer to Rabaul on New Britain, they would build more air bases, and that would enable them to have more and more land-based fighters do daily raids, multiple raids against Rabaul, taking out their shipping, you know, excuse me, whittling down their fighter capabilities, their pilots and their planes, until finally, on today's date, the Japanese decided they were going to move the last of their planes to Truk, their major port in the middle of the Central Pacific and in the Caroline Islands chain. And this effectively neutralized Rabaul. The Allies never bothered to conquer it. All they wanted to do was just neutralize it. They accomplished their goal, and now they can move on to their next main axis of attack, which would be for MacArthur to move up New Guinea into the Philippines, Nimitz doing his Central Pacific campaign, moving towards Japan through the island hopping campaign. And finally, on November 19th, 1945, speaking of island hopping, the United States Marines landed on Iwo Jima, and this would turn out to be one of the most bloody battles in the history of World War II, the Pacific Campaign. I'll get into this more as we get into this, as we talk about this later in the video series, but it was a month worth of slog. Iwo Jima was ideal for defense. The Japanese general in charge of the island had no qualms about digging in and making every yard of advance bloody, and that's what he did. So we'll get into this, but today was the first day that 30,000 Marines landed on Iwo Jima. I will say this: the Japanese were smart. They didn't open up immediately. They let, I think, the first two or three waves come in. They let the beach get clogged. The black volcanic sand meant that a lot of these heavy tanks and Amtraks that were going in would sink into the sand. And then once everything was clogged up, that's when they opened up. And then it was just hell on earth happened after that. But we'll talk about that more in later videos. So thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it. I can't wait to talk to you some more tomorrow.